The gunshot pierced the dawn air, echoing across the plains of Butte, Montana, as Pearl O'Malley fled through the tall grass, her heart pounding like wild hoofbeats against her ribs. The year was 1876, and for a woman with a tarnished reputation, the frontier offered little mercy and even fewer places to hide. Pearl's breath came in desperate gasps as she stumbled over the uneven ground, the hem of her dress catching on sagebrush. Behind her, the angry voices of the townsfolk grew distant, but their words still burned in her ears. Thief, harlot, brand her with the mark she deserves. The accusation had spread through, but like wildfire, Pearl O'Malley had stolen from her employer, seduced his son, and brought shame to a respected family. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when a woman stood alone. The rising sun cast long shadows across the Montana landscape as Pearl finally slowed, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She'd escaped the immediate danger, but where could she go now? Her reputation lay in tatters, and in a territory where a woman's good name was often her only currency, Pearl had been rendered penniless. "You're running mighty hard for someone who claims innocence," came a deep voice from her left. Pearl spun around, nearly losing her balance, to find a man atop a chestnut stallion watching her with curious blue eyes. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his weathered hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw dusted with stubble. A star-shaped badge gleamed on his leather vest. "Deputy Owen Quinn," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And you must be Pearl O'Malley, the woman half the town's been looking for since sunrise." Pearl's throat tightened. "Have you come to drag me back then?" The deputy studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That depends. Did you do what they're saying?" "No," Pearl answered, lifting her chin despite her fear. "Mr. Hollister accused me of theft when I refused his advances. When his son defended me, Mr. Hollister claimed I'd bewitched the boy." Her voice broke slightly. "They're talking of branding me as a thief and a woman of low character." Deputy Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He approached Pearl slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "Miss O'Malley, I've known Theodore Hollister for 3 years," he said. "And in that time, I've never known him to speak the honest truth when a lie might benefit him more." Hope flickered in Pearl's chest. "You believe me?" "Let's just say I've seen enough of this world to know that powerful men rarely face consequences, while those beneath them shoulder blame that isn't theirs." He offered her his canteen. "Drink. You look ready to collapse." Pearl accepted it gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "What now, deputy? They'll never believe my word over his." Owen Quinn looked back toward town, his expression thoughtful. "My brother has a ranch about 6 miles east of here. You could stay there while I sort this out." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." The deputy's eyes met hers, and something in their depths made Pearl's heart skip. "Maybe not. But I know what it's like to be judged by others' lies rather than your own truth. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "someone once told me we're all branded by grace alone, not by the shame others try to mark us with." As Pearl mounted behind the deputy, her arms hesitantly encircling his waist, she had no way of knowing that this moment, this chance encounter with Owen Quinn on the Montana plains, would forever alter the course of her life. The sun had climbed higher in the sky by the time they reached the Quinn Ranch. It was modest compared to some of the larger cattle operations in the territory, but the 2-story cabin with its wide porch and sturdy corrals spoke of hard work and careful stewardship. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "My brother Patrick runs this place," Owen explained as he helped Pearl dismount. He and his wife Lydia are good people. They'll keep you safe until we can clear your name." Pearl smoothed her rumpled dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Won't harboring me cause trouble for them?" "For you, trouble finds me regardless," Owen said with a wry smile. "Might as well be for something worthwhile." The front door swung open, revealing a tall man with the same striking blue eyes as Owen, though his hair was darker and his build slightly heavier. "Bringing home strays again, little brother," Patrick Quinn called, though his tone held no malice. "Patrick, this is Miss Pearl O'Malley," Owen replied. "She needs a place to stay for a while." Patrick's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Any friend of Owen's is welcome here. Come on in, Miss O'Malley. My wife just put coffee on." The interior of the Quinn home was warm and inviting, with handcrafted furniture and colorful quilts that softened the rustic space. A slender woman with auburn hair pinned in a practical bun appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lydia, this is Miss Pearl," Patrick said. "She'll be staying with us for a time." "You poor dear," Lydia said, immediately taking in Pearl's disheveled state. "You look like you've had quite a morning. Come, let's get you settled." As Lydia led Pearl upstairs to freshen up, Owen explained the situation to his brother in hushed tones. Pearl couldn't make out his words, but she saw Patrick's expression grow serious as he nodded. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt covering the bed and lace curtains framing the window. Lydia brought warm water for washing and a simple dress that was slightly too large but clean and intact. "It's not much, but it should do until we can get your things," Lydia said kindly. Pearl's throat tightened with emotion. "My things are just a few dresses and books at the Hollister house. But I doubt I'll ever see them again." "Nonsense," Lydia replied firmly. "If they're yours, Owen will make sure you get them back. That's the kind of man he is." When Pearl descended the stairs, feeling somewhat restored by clean clothes and water, Owen was preparing to leave. "I need to get back to town," he explained. "The longer I'm away, the more suspicious it will look. Patrick will take you out to the line cabin tomorrow if necessary. It's further from town and safer if people start searching." "What will you tell them about this morning?" Pearl asked. "That I followed your trail until it disappeared near the river," Owen said. "It's common enough for tracks to vanish there. In the meantime, I'll do some digging about Hollister and his accusations." Pearl wanted to thank him properly, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, watching as he settled his hat back on his head and stepped toward the door. "Deputy Quinn," she called suddenly. "Why did you really help me? The truth, please." Owen paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "When I saw you running," he finally said, "you didn't look guilty. You looked like someone fighting for their life. And in my experience, Miss O'Malley, innocent people sometimes run not from justice, but from the lack of it." His eyes held hers. "Rest today. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." With that, he was gone, leaving Pearl with an odd mixture of gratitude and uncertainty churning in her stomach. She barely knew Owen Quinn, yet her life was now in his hands. Over the next 3 days, Pearl settled into life at the Quinn Ranch. Lydia taught her to make sourdough bread and mend shirts, while Patrick showed her how to care for the horses. They never pressed her for details about the accusations, for which Pearl was grateful. The shame of even being associated with such claims was burden enough. On the 4th day, as Pearl was helping Lydia hang laundry in the yard, hoofbeats approached from the east. Both women tensed but relaxed when they recognized Owen's chestnut stallion. "Any news?" Patrick called, emerging from the barn. Owen dismounted, his expression grave. "Hollister's doubled the bounty for information on Pearl's whereabouts. $500 now." Pearl's knees weakened. "That's..." That's more than a year's wages for most men. He's determined, Owen agreed, accepting the cup of water Lydia offered. But I've found something interesting. Seems you're not the first young woman to be accused by Hollister. There was a girl last year, Emily Winters, who worked as a maid. She disappeared after similar accusations. Disappeared, Pearl echoed, a chill running through her despite the warm day. Left town suddenly, according to most folks, but her brother in Helena says she never arrived there as planned. Owen's jaw tightened. I'm beginning to think Hollister has a pattern of targeting women who rebuff him, then driving them away when they resist. Or worse, Patrick muttered. Pearl sank onto a nearby bench. What can we do? It's still my word against his, and he's one of the wealthiest men in the territory. Money buys influence, not truth, Owen said firmly. I've sent telegrams to sheriffs in neighboring counties asking about similar cases. And I've been watching Hollister's son, James. The boy looks miserable, like he's carrying a heavy secret. James tried to help me, Pearl said softly. He told his father to leave me alone, that I'd done nothing wrong. That's when Mr. Hollister accused me of corrupting him. Owen nodded. James might be our best hope for the truth, but approaching him directly would be too risky. For now, you need to stay hidden. That evening, as Pearl helped Lydia with supper, she found herself watching Owen as he sat at the table discussing cattle prices with Patrick. There was something compelling about the deputy, a quiet strength that drew her eye again and again. When he caught her looking, Pearl quickly turned her attention back to the potatoes she was mashing, a flush warming her cheeks. After the meal, Owen asked Pearl to join him on the porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. They sat in rocking chairs, the comfortable silence broken only by the creak of wood and the chorus of crickets. "Tell me about yourself, Miss O'Malley," Owen finally said. "How did you come to work for Hollister?" Pearl looked out across the darkening landscape. "I came west from Chicago 2 years ago after my parents died of influenza. I had an aunt in Denver who took me in, but she passed last winter. With no family and few prospects, I answered an advertisement for a housekeeper at the Hollister residence." She sighed. "It seemed like Providence at the time. And when did the trouble start?" "About 3 months ago. Mrs. Hollister was visiting her sister in St. Louis, and Mr. Hollister began paying me unwanted attention. Small things at first, standing too close, finding reasons to touch my hand or shoulder. Then comments about my appearance, suggestions that I could have a more comfortable position in the household." Pearl's voice faltered. "I made it clear his attention was unwelcome, but he persisted. The night before I fled, he came to my room, if James hadn't heard my protests, and intervened." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Owen understood. His hands tightened on the arms of the rocking chair, his knuckles white. "The next morning, Hollister accused me of stealing his wife's silver bracelet and attempting to seduce James. He said a thief and a harlot deserved to be branded as such, to warn others." Pearl shuddered at the memory. "They were heating the iron when I escaped through the kitchen." "No one deserves that," Owen said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Least of all someone whose only crime was defending her honor." Pearl turned to look at him, struck by the intensity in his eyes. "You really do believe me, don't you?" "Yes," he said simply. "I do." Something shifted between them in that moment, a fragile trust blossoming into something deeper. As the stars emerged overhead, Pearl realized that for the first time since fleeing Butte, she felt truly safe. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Quinn ranch. Pearl was gathering eggs in the hen house when she heard raised voices from the main house. Cautiously, she approached the kitchen door, pausing when she recognized the voice of Sheriff Miller from Butte. "Harboring a fugitive, Deputy Quinn," the sheriff was saying. That's a serious offense, even for a lawman. With all due respect, Sheriff, Owen replied evenly, Miss O'Malley hasn't been charged with any crime. Hollister's accusations aren't the same as a warrant. Theodore Hollister carries considerable weight in this county, Miller countered. He's demanding a search of all outlying properties. I can't make exceptions, not even for your brother's ranch. Pearl's heart raced. She couldn't let the Quinns risk everything for her. Before she could decide what to do, Patrick's voice joined the conversation. Sheriff, you know as well as I do that Hollister's reputation with young women is questionable at best. My brother is investigating those claims, as is his right as a deputy. Investigation or not, Miller said, if I discover you're hiding the O'Malley woman, I'll have no choice but to take her in and possibly you all as accessories. Pearl closed her eyes, leaning against the wall as despair washed over her. She couldn't stay here. The Quinns had been kind, but she wouldn't repay that kindness by bringing trouble to their door. Making her decision, Pearl quietly entered the house through the back door and crept upstairs to gather her borrowed clothes. She scribbled a brief note of thanks and apology, then slipped out through the bedroom window, climbing down the sturdy trellis that supported Lydia's climbing roses. The stables were empty, Patrick and the ranch hand having taken the horses out to check the northern pasture. Only Dancer, Lydia's gentle mare, remained in her stall. Pearl hesitated, taking the horse would be theft, exactly what she'd been falsely accused of, but she needed to put distance between herself and the ranch quickly. I'm sorry, she whispered to the mare as she hurriedly saddled her. I'll make sure you find your way home. Pearl had just led Dancer out of the stable when a voice stopped her cold. Going somewhere, Miss O'Malley? She turned to find Owen watching her, arms crossed over his chest. The sheriff was nowhere in sight. I heard everything, Pearl said. I can't stay here and put your family at risk. And where would you go? Montana territory isn't kind to women traveling alone, especially with a price on their head. I don't know, she admitted, but I won't have you arrested for helping me. Owen approached her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. Sheriff Miller has agreed to give me 3 days to present evidence in your defense before he conducts any searches. He's not unreasonable, just cautious. Hope flickered in Pearl's chest. Evidence? You have some. Not yet, Owen admitted. But I've arranged to meet James Hollister tonight. If he confirms your story, it could change everything. Pearl released her grip on Dancer's reins, her shoulders slumping. And if he doesn't? If his father has threatened him into silence? Then we find another way, Owen said firmly. But running isn't the answer, Pearl. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her breath catch. I'm scared, she confessed, the admission difficult for a woman who'd prided herself on independence. Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I know, but you're not alone anymore. His hand found hers, warm and calloused, and Pearl felt something inside her crack open a wall she'd built after years of loss and disappointment. She'd known this man less than a week, yet she trusted him more than anyone since her parents. 3 days, she agreed finally. But if there's no evidence by then, I won't let you sacrifice your badge or your freedom for me. Owen's lips curved into a slight smile. Fair enough. Now let's get Dancer back to her stall before Lydia notices she's missing. My sister-in-law is terrifying when it comes to that mare. That evening, Owen prepared to ride into town for his clandestine meeting with James Hollister. Pearl watched anxiously as he checked his revolver and tucked it into its holster. Be careful, she said. If Hollister discovers you're meeting his son. James suggested the meeting place, the old mill by the creek. It's been abandoned for years. Owen settled his hat on his head. I'll be back before dawn. Pearl nodded, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at her stomach. "I'll wait up." "No need," he said gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow might bring better news." But rest proved impossible. After the household had gone to bed, Pearl remained in the parlor, a lamp burning low as she alternated between pacing and staring out the window. The hours crawled by, midnight came and went, and still no sign of Owen. When the first hint of gray appeared on the horizon, Pearl's anxiety peaked. Something had gone wrong. Owen should have returned hours ago. The sound of approaching hoofbeats finally broke the pre-dawn silence. Pearl rushed to the door, relief flooding her as she recognized Owen's tall figure dismounting from his horse. But as he stepped into the light from the open doorway, her relief turned to horror. Blood stained the left side of Owen's shirt and a purpling bruise marred his jawline. He stumbled slightly as he climbed the porch steps. "Owen," Pearl gasped, rushing to support him. "What happened?" "Ambush," he said grimly, allowing her to help him inside. Hollister's men were waiting at the mill. James never showed. Pearl guided him to a chair, quickly fetching water and clean cloths from the kitchen. "You're hurt. Should I wake Patrick and Lydia?" "No." Owen winced as Pearl helped him remove his vest and shirt, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. "Let them sleep. It looks worse than it is." Pearl worked silently, cleaning the wound with gentle hands. It was indeed not as severe as the blood had suggested, a glancing blow from a knife rather than a direct stab, but it still needed tending. "How many were there?" she asked as she applied pressure to slow the bleeding. "3," Owen replied, his jaw tight with pain. "Hollister's foreman and 2 ranch hands. They said they were delivering a message to stop asking questions about you and Emily Winters." Pearl paused in her ministrations, her eyes meeting his. "Then there is a connection." "More than that," Owen said. "While they were working me over, one of them mentioned a place called Whitewater Canyon. Said both you and Emily should have ended up there." "What's in Whitewater Canyon?" "I don't know," Owen admitted. "It's about 15 miles northeast of here. Remote, rarely visited, but I intend to find out." Pearl tied off the bandage she'd fashioned, her fingers lingering momentarily on his bare skin. "Not alone, you won't." Owen caught her hand, his expression serious. "Pearl, it's too dangerous. These men aren't playing games." "If Hollister is hiding something in that canyon, then you'll need someone to watch your back," she interrupted firmly. "Besides, this concerns me directly. I have a right to know what happened to Emily Winters and what might have happened to me." Their faces were close, Owen still holding her hand against his chest. Pearl could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, strong and steady despite his injury. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he murmured, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "So I've been told," Pearl replied. "Is that a yes?" Owen sighed. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow, but you follow my lead, understand? Hollister's men won't hesitate to harm you or worse." Pearl nodded, suddenly aware of their proximity, of Owen's state of undress, of the intimacy of the moment. She pulled her hand away slowly, a flush warming her cheeks. "You should rest," she said, gathering the bloodied cloths. "I'll check on you in a few hours to change the bandage." As she turned to go, Owen caught her wrist gently. "Pearl." His voice was soft, hesitant. "Thank you for not running earlier today and for this." He gestured to his bandaged side. "You've risked everything for me," she replied simply. "It seems only fair I do the same for you." The understanding that passed between them in that moment went beyond words, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them. Something neither was quite ready to name. By morning, Owen's condition had improved enough that he insisted on proceeding with their plan to investigate Whitewater Canyon. Patrick was furious when told about the ambush, but after a heated discussion, he reluctantly agreed to their expedition on the condition that he accompany them. 3 guns are better than 2, he argued, and I know Whitewater Canyon better than either of you. They set out just after breakfast, with Lydia packing enough provisions for a full day's journey. Pearl rode Dancer while the brothers mounted their own horses. They took a roundabout route to avoid being seen from the main road, following game trails through dense pine forests. "What exactly are we looking for?" Pearl asked as they rode. "Anything unusual," Owen replied. "Signs of activity, disturbed ground structures. Anything that might explain why Hollister's men specifically mentioned that canyon." The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the canyon, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses along narrow paths. By midday, they reached the canyon's rim, looking down at a steep walled gorge with a silver ribbon of water gleaming at its base. "There," Patrick said suddenly, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising from among the trees about halfway down the canyon wall. "Someone's camped down there." Owen studied the smoke through his field glasses. "Looks permanent. There's a cabin of some sort, well hidden among those pines. Who would live all the way out here?" Pearl wondered. "Someone who doesn't want to be found," Patrick replied grimly. "Question is, are they hiding from Hollister or working for him?" They tethered their horses in a sheltered grove and began the careful descent into the canyon. The path was treacherous, loose stones skittering away beneath their boots. Owen insisted that Pearl stay between him and Patrick, where she'd be most protected if trouble arose. As they neared the source of the smoke, Owen signaled for them to stop and be silent. The cabin was now visible, a crude but solid structure of logs and stone with a small corral containing 2 horses. A figure moved in the doorway, and Owen tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "Wait," Pearl whispered, straining to see. "That's a woman." Indeed, the figure that emerged from the cabin was female, tall and thin, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a bucket toward a nearby spring, her movements suggesting youth despite a pronounced limp. "Emily Winters," Owen murmured, glancing at Pearl. "I never met her," Pearl replied. "She was gone before I arrived at Hollister's." Owen made a decision. "I'll approach alone. If it's a trap, you two can still get away." Before Pearl could protest, he was moving forward, stepping deliberately to make noise rather than startle the woman. Patrick pulled Pearl behind a large boulder, both watching anxiously as Owen called out a greeting. The woman dropped her bucket, spinning around with a startled cry. For a moment, she seemed poised to flee, but then recognition dawned on her face. "Deputy Quinn." Her voice carried faintly to where Pearl and Patrick hid. Owen nodded, keeping his hands visible. "Emily Winters, we've been looking for you." The woman Emily glanced nervously at the surrounding trees. "You shouldn't be here if they find you." "Who, Emily?" "Hollister's men." She nodded, her face pale with fear. "Please, you have to go. They check on me every few days. If they find you here, they'll kill you and me." Owen gestured for Pearl and Patrick to join them. As they emerged from hiding, Emily's eyes widened at the sight of Pearl. "You're the new one," she said softly. "The one who got away." Pearl's heart pounded. "You know who I am?" Emily nodded, tears filling her eyes. "They told me another girl had escaped. I prayed you'd run far enough." She touched her left shoulder unconsciously, where her dress covered what Pearl suddenly realized must be a brand. "They branded you," Pearl whispered, horrified. "After." Emily couldn't finish. "Hollister said no decent man would have me after what happened." "The brand was to make sure of it. They brought me here, told me if I ever tried to leave or tell anyone, they'd find me and do worse." Rage burned in Owen's eyes as he looked from Emily to Pearl. "This ends today. Emily, pack whatever you need. You're leaving this place." "You don't understand," Emily said desperately. "Hollister owns half the county. His men are everywhere. There's no escaping him." "There is," Patrick interjected firmly. "Our ranch is beyond his reach." And once the truth about what he's done comes out, a gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet splintering the wooden doorframe inches from Emily's head. All four dropped instinctively as a voice called from the ridge above. "Well now, isn't this touching? Deputy Quinn to the rescue again." 3 riders appeared on the rim of the canyon, rifles aimed down at the cabin clearing. Pearl recognized the lead man as Hollister's foreman, Jackson. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Quinn?" Jackson called. "Had to keep digging. Had to find poor Emily here." Owen had drawn his revolver and was scanning the ridge for cover. "It's over, Jackson. Emily's coming with us, and the whole territory's going to learn what Hollister did to her and tried to do to Pearl O'Malley." Jackson laughed, the sound echoing eerily through the canyon. "And who's going to believe a couple of soiled doves over Theodore Hollister? No, I think this ends differently." He raised his rifle. "Nothing personal, Deputy, just business." The shots came in quick succession, Jackson and his men firing down into the clearing, while Owen and Patrick returned fire from behind what little cover they could find. Pearl pulled Emily toward the relative safety of the cabin's stone chimney. "Is there another way out of here?" Pearl shouted over the gunfire. Emily nodded frantically. "A path at the back leads to a cave system, but it's narrow. They'd pick us off before we reached it." Pearl peered around the chimney. Owen and Patrick were pinned down, but their return fire was keeping Jackson's men from advancing down into the canyon. An idea formed in her mind, desperate but possibly their only chance. "Owen," she called. When he looked her way, she pointed to the horses in the corral. "Create a diversion." "We'll take the back path," understanding flashed in his eyes. He nodded, then whispered something to Patrick. On a count of 3, both men redirected their fire toward the corral gate. The shots splintered the wooden latch, and the panicked horses burst free, creating chaos as they bolted in different directions. "Now!" Pearl grabbed Emily's hand, and they ran for the narrow path behind the cabin. Owen and Patrick followed, laying down covering fire as Jackson's men scrambled to adjust their aim. The path was indeed treacherous, barely wide enough for one person, with a sheer drop to the canyon floor on one side. Emily led the way, her familiarity with the route evident despite her limp. Pearl followed, with Patrick and then Owen bringing up the rear, pausing occasionally to fire back at their pursuers. "They're following on foot," Owen called from behind. "Move faster." The path eventually opened into a series of interconnected caves. Emily grabbed a prepared torch from just inside the entrance, lighting it with practiced hands. "This way," she urged, leading them deeper into the mountain. "There's an exit that comes out 3 miles east of here. They know about it, but they might think we're hiding in the caves instead of escaping." The limestone caverns twisted and branched, the torch casting eerie shadows on the damp walls. Pearl lost all sense of direction as they hurried through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. "How did you find these caves?" Patrick asked Emily as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. "I've had months to explore," she replied grimly. "I needed to know every possible escape route in case one day I found the courage to run." They emerged from the cave system as the sun was beginning to set, finding themselves in a wooded ravine far from their original position. Their horses were gone, meaning they faced a long walk back to the Quinn ranch, but they were alive, and more importantly, they had Emily. "We need to get to the sheriff," Owen said as they paused to catch their breath. "With Emily's testimony and what we've seen, he'll have no choice but to arrest Hollister." "Sheriff Miller won't cross Hollister," Emily said, shaking her head. "He never has before." "He will this time," Owen insisted, "because we're not just going to Miller. We're going to the territorial marshal in Helena. Hollister might own a county sheriff, but he doesn't own federal law." Pearl looked at Owen, admiration swelling in her chest. Despite the danger, despite being outnumbered and wounded, he'd never wavered in his determination to see justice done. "It's a 20-mile walk to the ranch," Patrick warned, looking at the darkening sky. "And we're being hunted." "Then we'd better start walking," Owen replied grimly, "and stay off the main trails." The journey through the night was arduous, particularly for Emily with her injured leg. They took turns supporting her, stopping only when absolutely necessary. By the time dawn broke, they had covered perhaps half the distance to the Quinn ranch, but exhaustion was taking its toll. "We need to rest," Pearl finally said, noticing how Emily was trembling with fatigue. "Just for an hour." They found shelter in a small copse of trees near a stream, taking turns keeping watch while the others caught brief moments of sleep. Pearl volunteered for the first watch, settling on a fallen log with Owen's revolver in her lap. He had insisted she take it, as she was the freshest among them. As the others slept, Pearl allowed herself to truly process what they had discovered. Emily's fate could easily have been her own, branded, imprisoned in isolation, used as Hollister saw fit. The thought made her sick with rage and gratitude in equal measure. If Owen hadn't believed her that first day on the plains. "Penny for your thoughts," came a soft voice. Pearl turned to find Owen awake, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "Just thinking about how differently this could have ended for me," she admitted as he came to sit beside her on the log. "If you hadn't stopped that morning." "But I did," he said simply, "and here we are." Pearl studied his profile in the dappled morning light. "Why did you really help me, Owen? The whole truth this time?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My sister," he finally said. "When I was 17 and she was 15, something similar happened. The son of a local banker took a liking to her. When she refused him, he claimed she had led him on, then stolen from his family. No one believed her denials except me and our parents." Owen's voice grew tight with old pain. "One night, the banker's son and his friends dragged her from our home. They didn't brand her with iron, but the things they did, the names they called her, they branded her all the same. She never recovered, took her own life 6 months later." Pearl's throat constricted. "Owen, I'm so sorry. When I saw you running that morning with that look of terror and defiance on your face, I saw my sister." He turned to look at her directly. "But then I got to know you, Pearl O'Malley, and I saw something else entirely." "What did you see?" she asked softly, her heart beating faster. Owen's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "A woman of remarkable courage, someone who rises each morning despite all the reasons the world gives her to falter. Someone I find myself thinking about even when I should be concentrating on 1,000 other things." The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Pearl knew this wasn't the time or place for what was building between them, not with danger still pursuing them, not with so much unresolved. But she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at his words. "When this is over," she said, squeezing his hand, "when Hollister is brought to justice and Emily is safe, we should continue this conversation." Owen's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "I'd like that very much." A twig snapped somewhere in the forest beyond their shelter, and both tensed, the moment broken. Owen put a finger to his lips, drawing his spare revolver from his boot as he rose to investigate. "Stay here," he whispered. "Wake Patrick if I'm not back in 2 minutes." Pearl watched anxiously as he disappeared among the trees, every sense alert for danger. The seconds stretched interminably until Owen reappeared, his expression relieved. "Just a deer," he reported. "But we should move on soon. We've rested enough." They continued their journey as the day warmed, making better time now that Emily had rested. By mid-afternoon, they reached a familiar ridge overlooking the Quinn ranch. The sight of the cabin with smoke rising peacefully from its chimney nearly brought tears to Pearl's eyes. "We made it," Patrick said, grinning wearily. "Lydia's going to have my hide for disappearing overnight." Owen chuckled. "Mine too, I imagine." But as they began their descent toward the ranch, a new worry surfaced in Pearl's mind. What happens now? Hollister knows we've found Emily. He'll come after all of us with everything he has. "Not if we move quickly," Owen replied. "Patrick will take you and Emily to the line cabin while I ride for Helena tonight. The territorial marshal owes me a favor. He'll send deputies immediately." "And if Hollister's men reach the ranch before the marshal?" Pearl pressed. "They won't," Patrick said grimly, patting the rifle slung across his back. "The ranch hands are loyal and they're good shots. Anyone coming for you ladies will regret it." Lydia's relief at seeing them transformed quickly to alarm when she heard their story. But she moved with efficient purpose, packing food and supplies for the line cabin while Patrick gathered the ranch hands to explain the situation. As dusk approached, Owen prepared to leave for Helena. Pearl followed him to the stables, watching as he saddled a fresh horse. "Be careful," she said, echoing her words from the night before. "Hollister's men will be watching the roads." "I'll take the old mining trail," Owen assured her. "It adds distance but keeps me hidden." He tightened the saddle girth, then turned to face her. "You'll be safe at the line cabin. It's well hidden and Patrick's men know how to defend it." Pearl nodded, though anxiety still churned in her stomach. "How long will you be gone?" "3 days at most." "The marshal will want your statements as soon as possible, yours and Emily's." Owen hesitated, then reached out to touch Pearl's cheek gently. "When I return, Hollister won't be able to hurt anyone ever again. You'll be free, Pearl." The tenderness in his touch made Pearl's heart ache with emotions she'd kept carefully guarded. With Hollister's threat still looming, she'd not allowed herself to fully acknowledge what was growing between her and Owen. But now, with him preparing to ride into danger for her once more, she couldn't hold back. Rising on tiptoe, Pearl pressed her lips to his in a brief but fervent kiss. Owen froze for an instant, then responded with a gentle pressure that spoke of restrained passion and tender care. When they parted, Owen's eyes were dark with emotion. "That," he said softly, "is something worth coming back for." Pearl smiled, though tears threatened. "Then you'd better hurry, Deputy Quinn." With a final touch of his hand to her face, Owen mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Pearl watched until he disappeared from view, then turned to join the others for the journey to the line cabin. The line cabin was more primitive than the main ranch house, but solidly built and well situated for defense, nestled against a rocky hillside with clear views of the approaching trail. Patrick stationed 3 ranch hands as guards, 1 at the cabin and 2 at vantage points along the trail. Emily, still exhausted from their ordeal, fell asleep almost immediately on one of the narrow bunks. Unable to rest, Pearl sat by the window with Lydia, both women watching the darkness beyond the lamplight. "He'll be all right," Lydia said softly, correctly interpreting Pearl's worried expression. "Owen knows these mountains better than most, and he's not easily caught off guard." "It's my fault he's in danger," Pearl replied. "All of you are in danger because of me." Lydia's hand covered hers. "No, dear. You're in danger because a powerful man thought he could take what wasn't freely given. The blame lies with Theodore Hollister, not you." Pearl looked at the sleeping form of Emily, the visible evidence of Hollister's cruelty. "How does a man become so twisted, to hurt women, to brand them like cattle. Some men mistake power for right, Lydia said sadly. They believe their wealth or position entitles them to whatever or whoever they desire. She squeezed Pearl's hand. But not all men are like that. Patrick and Owen. They understand that true strength lies in protecting others, not exploiting them. Owen told me about his sister, Pearl said quietly. Is that why he became a lawman? Lydia nodded. After she died, he swore no other woman would suffer the same fate if he could prevent it. He was just 19 when he pinned on that badge. Pride colored her voice. In the 8 years since, he's built quite a reputation for standing up to men like Hollister. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the night deepened, both women finding comfort in the simple act of sharing stories. Pearl learned that Lydia had come west as a schoolteacher 5 years earlier, meeting Patrick when his horse threw a shoe outside her schoolhouse. They'd been married within 3 months, a whirlwind romance that had raised eyebrows but proven lasting. When you know, Lydia said with a small smile. Sometimes the heart recognizes what belongs to it faster than the mind can catch up. Pearl thought of Owen, of his steady presence, his unwavering support, the way her pulse quickened whenever their eyes met. Was that what she was feeling? Recognition of something meant to be. Before she could pursue the thought further, a sharp whistle came from outside 3 short bursts, the signal they'd arranged to indicate approaching riders. Patrick burst through the door moments later, his rifle in hand. Riders coming up the North Trail. 6, maybe more. Hollister's men, Pearl asked, her throat tight with fear. Most likely, they must have found one of our hands in town and followed him. Patrick turned to his wife. Lydia, get the women to the root cellar. It's stocked with provisions and has the escape tunnel to the creek bed. I want to help, Pearl insisted. I can shoot. Patrick assessed her for a moment, then nodded. We need every gun, but if I tell you to run, you run. Understood, Pearl nodded, accepting the shotgun he handed her. Emily had awakened at the commotion, her face pale with terror. They've found us, she whispered. They'll kill us all. No, Lydia said firmly, helping Emily to her feet. They won't get that chance. Come, I'll show you the cellar. If fighting starts, that's where you'll go. The next half hour passed in tense preparation. Patrick positioned Pearl at an upstairs window with a clear view of the approaching trail, while he and the ranch hands took up defensive positions around the cabin's perimeter. The riders appeared just after midnight, moonlight gleaming off their weapons as they approached cautiously. Pearl counted 8 men, led by Jackson, Hollister's foreman. Patrick Quinn, Jackson called when they were within hailing distance. We know you're harboring fugitives. Send out the women and we'll leave your property intact. The only fugitives here are the men who assaulted a deputy and imprisoned an innocent woman. Patrick shouted back. Turn around and leave my land or face the consequences. Jackson's laugh carried on the night air. Your brother's not here to protect you, Quinn. We caught him on the Helena Road. He won't be joining this party. Pearl's blood ran cold at his words. Had they captured Owen? Was he hurt? Or worse, he's lying. One of the ranch hands whispered from his position nearby. Trying to break our resolve. Pearl desperately hoped he was right, but a seed of fear had been planted. She tightened her grip on the shotgun, forcing herself to focus on the immediate threat. Jackson raised his arm and his men spread out, seeking cover around the clearing. The standoff had begun. The first shot came from the darkness beyond the riders, one of Patrick's men firing from his hidden position. The bullet struck a Hollister rider in the shoulder, knocking him from his horse with a cry of pain. Chaos erupted as both sides opened fire, the night splintered by gunshots and shouts. Pearl held her position at the window, waiting for a clear target rather than wasting ammunition. When one of Hollister's men made a dash for the cabin's front door, she fired. The the shotgun's blast catching him in the leg and sending him tumbling to the ground. The fighting was intense but brief. Hollister's men, expecting an easy raid against a few women and cowboys, found themselves facing determined resistance from well-positioned defenders. Within minutes, 3 were wounded and the others had fallen back to regroup. "They'll try again," Patrick said grimly, reloading his rifle. "Probably wait for daylight when they can see better." Pearl checked her remaining ammunition, worry gnawing at her. "What about Owen, if they really did intercept him?" "Owen can take care of himself," Patrick replied, though concern shadowed his eyes. "And if they've harmed him, they'll answer to more than just the law. They'll answer to me." Dawn broke over a tense stalemate. Hollister's remaining men had withdrawn to the tree line, occasionally firing to keep the cabin's defenders pinned down. Patrick had 1 man wounded, not seriously, but enough to reduce their fighting strength. As morning light filtered through the windows, Pearl caught movement on the ridge above the cabin, a flash of color that didn't belong to the natural landscape. She signaled to Patrick, who raised his field glasses to look. "Riders," he confirmed, a frown creasing his brow. "At least a dozen, coming fast." Pearl's heart sank. If these were reinforcements for Hollister, their situation had just become dire. "Should we use the escape tunnel?" she asked, her mind racing through their dwindling options. Patrick studied the approaching riders for another moment, then unexpectedly broke into a wide grin. "No need. That's the territorial marshal's pennant. Owen made it through." Relief washed over Pearl like a cool mountain stream. The approaching riders were indeed the marshal's men, with Owen riding among them. The sight of him, alive and unharmed, made her knees weak with gratitude. Hollister's men, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered and outflanked, scattered into the forest. The marshal's deputies pursued several, while others secured the perimeter around the cabin. Owen dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his eyes searching the cabin doorway where Pearl now stood. When he saw her, unharmed and waiting, the tension visibly drained from his shoulders. "You're safe," he said simply as he reached her, his voice rough with emotion. "You made it through," she replied, fighting the urge to throw her arms around him in front of the marshal and his men. "Jackson claimed they'd caught you on the road." "They tried," Owen admitted with a wry smile. "But I know these mountains better than they do." His expression sobered. "Is everyone all right, Emily?" "We're all fine," Pearl assured him. "A few scrapes and 1 minor wound among the hands, but nothing serious." The territorial marshal, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face, approached them. "Deputy Quinn says you ladies have quite a story to tell," he said, tipping his hat respectfully to Pearl. "I'd like to hear it if you're willing." Over the next hour, Pearl and Emily gave their statements to the marshal, recounting every detail of Hollister's actions and the subsequent events. The marshal's expression grew increasingly grim as they spoke, particularly when Emily showed him the brand on her shoulder, the letter H crudely burned into her flesh. "I've dealt with Theodore Hollister before," the marshal said when they had finished. "Man's always skirted the edge of the law, but this—" He shook his head in disgust. "This is beyond the pale. I'll have him in custody before sundown. He'll fight," Emily warned, her voice small but determined. "He has powerful friends." "Not powerful enough," the marshal assured her. "Kidnapping, assault, attempted murder of a peace officer, these aren't charges that money can make disappear. And I suspect once we start investigating, we'll find more victims who'll come forward." As the marshal organized his men to ride for Butt, Owen pulled Pearl aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath a pine tree at the edge of the clearing. "The marshal wants to move quickly," he explained. "We'll ride for Butt within the hour to arrest Hollister." I'd like you and Emily to stay here with Patrick and Lydia until it's done." Pearl nodded, understanding the wisdom of his request, though part of her wanted to witness Hollister's downfall firsthand. "How long will you be gone?" "A day, perhaps 2. Hollister will be transported to Helena for trial. The marshal wants both you and Emily to testify, but that won't be for a few weeks." Owen's eyes searched hers. "After that, you'll be free to go wherever you choose." The thought should have been liberating, but instead, Pearl felt a curious hollowness at the prospect of leaving Montana, of leaving Owen. "And where would I go?" she asked softly. Owen took her hands in his expression suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "You could stay," he suggested, his voice low and earnest. "Here in Butte, or—" He hesitated, then continued with newfound resolve. "Or you could stay with me, not as my housekeeper or as someone under my protection, but as my wife if you'd have me." Pearl's breath caught. "Owen, we've known each other barely a week." "I know," he acknowledged with a small, self-deprecating smile, "and I know how it sounds. But in that week, Pearl O'Malley, I've come to understand something my brother and Lydia told me years ago, that sometimes the heart recognizes what belongs to it in an instant." His words echoed Lydia's from the night before, striking a chord deep within Pearl. This past week had been filled with danger and fear, but also with moments of profound connection. Owen had believed in her when no one else would, had risked everything to protect her, had seen her not as damaged goods but as a woman of worth and dignity. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Owen continued, seeing her hesitation. "Only that you consider it, that you consider us." Pearl looked up at him, this good, honorable man who had changed the course of her life, and felt the last of her defenses crumbling. "I don't need time to consider," she said quietly. "My heart recognized you that first day, even if my mind was too afraid to admit it." Joy dawned in Owen's eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Pearl confirmed, a smile blooming across her face. "Though I think we should perhaps court properly before we marry, just to satisfy convention." Owen laughed, the sound bright and free. "Convention be damned," he said, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead against hers. "But if courtship is what you want, courtship you shall have, though I warn you, I'm not a patient man." "Nor am I a patient woman," Pearl replied with a mischievous smile. "So perhaps a short courtship would suffice." Owen's laughter joined hers, the sound carrying across the clearing where the marshal's men were preparing to depart. Several glanced their way with knowing smiles, but Pearl found she didn't mind. After days of fear and hiding, this moment of open joy felt like redemption. The arrest of Theodore Hollister sent shockwaves through Butte and the surrounding territory. The wealthy cattle baron fought the charges bitterly, but with Emily's testimony, Pearl's corroboration, and the physical evidence of the remote cabin, even his money and influence couldn't shield him from justice. 3 more women eventually came forward with similar stories, their collective voices creating a case too strong to dismiss. 4 months after Pearl's desperate flight across the Montana plains, Hollister was convicted on multiple counts of assault, kidnapping, and attempted murder. The judge, unmoved by Hollister's prominent position, sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison. "He'll likely die there," Owen told Pearl as they left the Helena courthouse after the verdict. "A man like that doesn't fare well in prison." Pearl took his hand as they walked toward the hotel where they were staying during the trial. "I should feel satisfaction, I suppose, but mostly I feel relief. Relief that he can't hurt anyone else." "That's because you're a better person than he ever was," Owen said, squeezing her fingers gently. "You sought justice, not vengeance. Pearl smiled up at him, her heart full. These past months had transformed her in ways she was still discovering. With the support of Owen, Patrick, and Lydia, she had found not just safety but a true home, and with it, a sense of belonging she'd thought forever lost after her parents' deaths. Emily, too, had begun to heal. She was staying with a cousin in Helena, working as a seamstress and slowly reclaiming her life. The physical brand would always remain, but the shame Hollister had tried to impose was fading with each passing day. "What happens now?" Pearl asked as they reached the hotel. "Now that it's truly over." Owen's smile was tender as he looked down at her. "Now, Pearl O'Malley, I believe I owe you a proper courtship, though I seem to recall you mentioning something about it being a short one." Pearl laughed, her eyes dancing with happiness. "I did say that, didn't I? And you know I'm a woman of my word." "Indeed you are," Owen agreed, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "So perhaps we should discuss just how short this courtship might be. Over dinner, perhaps." 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn day with the aspen trees blazing gold against the Montana sky, Pearl O'Malley became Pearl Quinn in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Patrick stood beside his brother, while Lydia served as Pearl's matron of honor. Emily was there too, her smile genuine if still touched with shadows, witnessing the union of the man and woman who had saved her life. The territorial marshal had made a special trip for the occasion, bringing with him a wedding gift, a formal pardon clearing Pearl's name of all Hollister's false accusations, signed by the territorial governor himself. "Not that anyone believed those lies anyway," the marshal said gruffly as he presented the document. "But I thought you might like to have it official." Pearl thanked him, touched by the gesture, though she'd long since stopped worrying about her reputation. The people who mattered knew the truth, and the rest would eventually forget the scandal as new gossip replaced the old. After the ceremony and celebration, as twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Pearl and Owen stood on the porch of their new home, a modest but comfortable cabin Owen had built on a parcel of land adjoining his brother's ranch. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the first stars appear. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Pearl replied honestly, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how much has changed in half a year, from running for my life to this." Owen turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "You know, that morning when I found you on the plains, I told you something my father once said to me, that we're all branded by grace alone, not by the shame others try to mark us with." Pearl nodded, remembering. "Those words gave me hope when I had none left." "My father was a preacher before he turned to ranching," Owen explained. "Not a fire and brimstone type, but a man who believed in redemption and second chances. He taught us that every person carries worth that can't be diminished by others' actions or opinions." "A wise man," Pearl said softly. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have loved you," Owen assured her, "almost as much as I do." As he bent to kiss her, Pearl felt a profound sense of coming home, not to a place, but to a person. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together, branded not by shame but by the grace they had found in each other's arms. The years that followed were not without challenges. The hard winter of 1878 tested every ranch in the territory, including the Quinns. A dispute with a neighboring cattle outfit led to tense confrontations that nearly erupted into violence before the territorial courts resolved the boundary issues. And Pearl suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage before successfully carrying their first child, a son they named James Owen, to term in 1880. But through it all, the love between Pearl and Owen only deepened. strengthened by shared joys and sorrows alike. Owen continued as deputy for several years before being elected sheriff when Miller retired. Pearl, drawing on her own experiences, established a women's aid society in Butte that provided shelter and support to women fleeing abusive situations. Emily Winters eventually married a kind-hearted blacksmith from Helena and had 2 children of her own. Though the physical and emotional scars of her ordeal never fully disappeared, she found happiness in a life Hollister had tried to deny her. Theodore Hollister died in prison in 1884, unrepentant to the end. The news reached the Quinn ranch on the same day Pearl discovered she was expecting their second child, a daughter they would name Grace, in honor of the principle that had guided them through their darkest hours. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Owen took Pearl's hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Any regrets?" he asked, his blue eyes still as piercing as the day they'd met, though laugh lines had begun to crease their corners. Pearl looked out at the life they'd built together, the home filled with love, the children who embodied their hopes for the future, the community they'd helped shape into a more just and compassionate place. "Not a single one," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder as the Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of promise. "Not a single one."